Back philosophers. So this week we're going to start our discussion about the existence of God. So we're going to do this in this week and in our last week of the course. So in this first week we're going to talk about various arguments for the existence of God, and next week we're going to talk about arguments against the existence of God. So this is obviously a major topic under the heading of metaphysics that I talked about last week, that metaphysics deals with what things exist. And one of the most important questions about what exists, and one of the questions that philosophers have wrestled with for the longest amount of time, is the question about whether or not God exists. And if so, sort of what exactly is God like? So the way we're going to examine this question is through this dialogue, or I guess a trialogue. There's three characters in it called Does God Exist? So make sure you have this book. In this book, there's going to be three friends discussing these various arguments. So David is going to meet as the theist, Oscar is going to be the atheist, and Sophie is going to be the agnostic, trying to play the neutral judge between them. So we're going to read the first 6 chapters of this book, even though there's 9 chapters in total. If you want to go on and read chapters 7, 8, 9, feel more than welcome to. There is some good stuff there, but we're just not going to discuss it in class. So chapter 1 is going to discuss sort of the burden of proof. It's just going to sort of lay out sort of how this discussion ought to go about. How exactly should the atheist and the theist engage in this dispute? Chapters 2 through 4 are going to go over some of those common arguments for the existence of God. And chapters 5 and 6, which we'll do next week, are going to discuss some of the most common arguments against the existence of God. Now, in order to discuss this, we need to have sort of a basic conception of what exactly God is, so we have the same thing in mind when we're talking about whether or not God exists. So the idea we're going to have in mind is of a God that is omnipotent, which means that God is all-powerful. God can do all things that are logically possible. God is omniscient, which means God is all-knowing. God knows all truths. And God is omnibenevolent, which means he's all-loving, or he's perfectly good. And God is, in this sense, is typically considered to be the creator of all things, while God himself is an eternal being that exists necessarily, that has always existed and that must exist. So this general conception of God is going to be a fairly broad conception that all 3 of the major Abrahamic monotheisms, whether Christianity, Judaism, or Islam, could all hold to. So you can think of these arguments for the existence of God as being sort of arguments for any of these religions, that they're going to be sort of independent of these 3. Or possibly other religions outside. It might even be consistent with some versions of, say, like Zoroastrianism or something. But these 3 are going to be sort of like the first ones to sort of keep in mind, because these 3 are the most sort of common religions that get discussed in this literature. So what to look for when reading these first 2 chapters? First, look at how the members of our dialogue decide to frame their discussion. They're going to try and be really careful and trying to figure out what is the most fruitful way to engage in this debate. In the second chapter, we're going to look at an argument for the existence of God from the fact that the universe began to exist. So look for how they walk through that argument. And then be careful when they go through and they explain what nothing is, what nothing can or cannot do. This concept of nothing is going to play an important role in our discussion for this week. So dive into your dialogue, get reading these first 2 chapters, and get your questions in.